Here now, Texas Representative Michael Cloud. He is also a member of the Oversight and Accountability Committee and will be at the hearing this week. Representative, thank you for your time. Let's start there with just the influx of migrants to some of these major cities across the country. Do you appreciate the challenge of these cities logistically and financially to handle the influx over the last few years?
Well, as someone from South Texas, they are now just experiencing what Texans have experienced for years. And certainly we understand the weight it is on infrastructure. We understand the competition for nurses, for example, that have manned some of these facilities, or teachers that have been taken out of the school districts of our kids to help be part of this migrant surge that's coming across our borders. We certainly understand in ways that these big cities are finally now understanding. You know, for a long time, they got away with these altruistic ideas, feigned notions of compassion, but once they're having to deal with it, they're now realizing that the taxpayers are not supportive of this. They do not want this in their communities. They want their money going to teach their schools. They want a city and an infrastructure that's going to support them and their families.
Some of these mayors who will be testifying have been accused of standing in the way of the federal incentive to get these migrants illegally in the country out and some of the raids. What concerns you the most, and what specific examples have you seen that you want these mayors to address?
Well, first of all, let's talk about the 100,000 fentanyl deaths in our country that have happened because of what we've allowed the cartel influence that we've allowed into our country. And then time after time after time, we've heard of illegal immigrants who've been detained, released, and then commit the most heinous crimes upon people, repeat offenders, because oftentimes these cities will not honor ICE detainers. And so they already have them in custody, and ICE is ready to pick them up. They're ready to get them out of the country. We don't want criminals in our country. I think that's a pretty universal agreement across party spectrums. And yet these mayors in these cities are protecting the criminals instead of the communities. This is atrocious. It's a perversion of the rule of law. It needs to be stopped. It needs to be addressed. And it is illegal to harbor criminals, and something Tom Homan's made clear. And I think we'll see action on that going forward for those who are going to continue this bad action.
And from what you've been told, stories that you've heard, how are they protecting criminals, specific to Chicago, for example, or New York? What have they done to stand in the way of these raids?
Well, we've seen security leaks. That's one of the things we're dealing with. But what happens usually is they'll arrest criminals for a specific crime in their community. Then they'll go through the database, realize that ICE has a detainer on them, but then they'll go ahead and release them back into the community instead of honoring ICE's detainer. So this means that ICE has to go into that community and take the extra risk of someone who already had in custody, and take the risk upon those law enforcement to re-arrest the person who was already in custody, not to mention the danger that you've released on the community. So this notion of sanctuary cities is actually a perversion of the term. It's actually a biblical term that they've perverted, and it's wreaking havoc on the families within those communities, the families who many times for generations helped build those communities. And to allow, there's a right way to come into this country. We have an immigration process, a legal immigration process. My wife is a legal immigrant, so there's a right way to come to this country. We're talking about stopping the illegal process, and certainly prioritizing the criminal element of that illegal process.
This hearing is sort of setting itself up as, as we've watched these in the past, these mayors will be in the hot seat. They'll take questions from both sides. Likely those who are concerned about their sanctuary city policies will throw them some tough questions. There could be some uncomfortable exchanges, and then they'll be praised for what they're doing. The outcome of this hearing, what do you expect? I mean, the consequence of pulling federal funding, what would satisfy you and your colleagues from these mayors as they head back to their cities to address this issue?
Yeah, when the stories come to light of the criminal aspect that they've allowed, how they've continued to prioritize criminals over their communities, I expect to see that we'll have the continual public outcry that we've seen in the past. At a minimum, we're going to stop sending federal funds to to communities that refuse to enforce federal law or allow the federal government to enforce the law, to stand in the way. And the next step after that, if they continue to do that, would be to recognize that these guys are harboring criminals. That is a legal offense. And Tom Homan has stated he's willing to go in and arrest those who are going to do that. If we were, as a United States citizen, were to harbor criminals in our house and to keep law enforcement from coming in and arresting them, we would be arrested. And just because you hold a title doesn't mean that the law doesn't apply to you.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.